I'm sure we are all guilty at one point or another for saying I'm sorry, even in situations that don't really require an apology. It simply just becomes second nature. But there are times, especially in the workplace, where apologizing can actually backfire. So here to talk about maybe some other things we can say instead is executive coach and psychologist Dr. Orbe-Austin. Hi, Dr. Lisa.
Hi, Natalie.
Let's just start at the beginning. Where does this need to over-apologize come from?
It typically comes from the desire to be pleasing to others, to be perfect, and typically to overfunction in situations where you feel like you have a lack of control. And so the desire to kind of apologize and feel like you're responsible for virtually everything usually comes from those different kind of experiences.
And when we go to the workplace, we're going to go over some scenarios here with you. The first one is if you have tech problems. We've seen this, of course, in the land of pandemic and work from home. Maybe something's taking too long to load or there's a glitch. We often blame ourselves. We say, oh, I'm sorry for this wait. What should we be saying instead to cut that silence?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that almost everyone in that room, likely who's run a presentation or a meeting, has run into a technical issue. And so it's very, very common, and people usually are pretty understanding. And to kind of really ground ourselves and be calm when we then say to people the obvious, which is like, we're having a technical issue. Thank you for your patience. But if it's taking too long, you can also give them something to do. You can tell them to look at a doc you've just given out, or have them reflect on a question that you have upcoming, or give them a break. So really think about the options that you have in that moment to kind of defer sort of some of these just sitting and waiting. But I don't think it necessarily requires an apology at all.
And this next scenario here, if you have an addition to a meeting, you're all sitting around and people are talking, or maybe you have a counter thought to something that has been brought up, to start that conversation, a lot of us will say, I'm sorry, but what's a better way to enter a conversation and be heard?
I think it's important to think about the fact that you're not sorry, frankly, usually in those situations. And then saying I'm sorry, but can actually be confrontational. So it's really important in those moments to consider another entry point, like, I have another perspective. Let's take a look at it this way. What about this thought? And so really finding ways to kind of enter without kind of saying I'm sorry, or kind of setting up a really confrontational dynamic.
Now, there will be times at work, Dr. Lisa, that we really do mess up. Some say that saying I'm sorry or apologizing, that might not be the strongest response. What's response? What do you recommend?
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with apologizing in a situation where you have done something wrong. I think that's important. But in situations where you're just getting feedback, it's okay to say, thank you so much for this feedback. It's really useful, to my growth, to my next steps, all of that stuff. I'm going to actually take it and do this with it. So I think really responding to the feedback in a helpful and thankful way can be a really nice way to kind of deal with sort of negative, critical, constructive feedback rather than apologizing for it.
Now, this over-apologizing behavior, it doesn't happen with everyone. It seems to be most common. Why is it most common in women and employees of color?
Yeah, I think, oftentimes we're feeling a sense of, there's a lot of discrimination at work for women and people of color. And I think we do not want to get noticed for making a mistake or having an error. So it can be really difficult in those moments to feel like you shouldn't be sorry. But I think it's really important to really rethink how we show up in the workplace and allow ourselves to be human in these moments and not necessarily diminish our capacities, strengths, skills by kind of constantly over apologizing. I think we're also set up to people please in these environments. And so I think it really is important to challenge yourself not to do it.
Now, I want to get your advice here. You say challenge yourself not to do it. So if there is a situation where you're tempted to just blurt it out and say, I'm sorry, what should you think about before you speak?
Yeah, I think you want to think about first, are you really sorry? Is this something you're really sorry about? And if it's not, don't use that word. Try something different. Try to take a pause. And even if you have to stop before you respond, think about other ways to kind of enter this without an apology to start out with. It also takes some time practicing some of the phrases that are useful and helpful in those moments, but try not to start with I'm sorry, because oftentimes we shouldn't be. Yeah,
I also think that in life in general, when you say it too much, it loses its effect, that you aren't really actually sorry. You just say it to move on.
Yeah. Yes. And I think also, too, it makes us look like we don't have a lot of confidence in the moment. We're really kind of like always kind of screwing up. It can be perceived in that way. So I do think it's really important to think about the perspective that it leaves when you're constantly apologizing for things that you shouldn't be apologizing for.
All right, Dr. Lisa, great little conversation today. Thanks for your time. You guys can find Dr. Lisa on social media at Dr. Orbe-Austin, and she has a new book coming out in December. Can't wait to talk about that. Your Unstoppable Greatness.